Hello everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back. I hope that you are all well, and if you are new, thanks for checking out my channel. Please hit subscribe and stick around. Today is part one of two videos. Earlier this week I did the birth year tag and mentioned that this past week was my birthday week. And my birthday is now over and I am officially 44 in 22. So I thought it might be fun to celebrate by sharing 22 of my 5-star fiction books, and then the next video will be 22 of my 5-star non-fiction books, and I will post both of those below depending on which video you're watching. So I'm not going to go into great detail about these books because I want to finish this before I turn 45, but I will share a little bit about each of them. And I'm not going to go as far back as childhood books, so there aren't any children's books or middle grade books on the list. That would need to be a whole other video, I think. So I am choosing books that I read starting around probably about 14, 15, and I'm going to share them in a publication order. That just helps me and gives me some kind of organization. So 3 of the books were published before I was born, and I'm going to start off with a book that no one will be surprised about if you've been watching my channel, at least for a little while. That is Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery, which was published in 1908, so well before I was born. I celebrated Anne's birthday a week ago by sharing my collection of Anne of Green Gables books, and I can leave a link below or up top so you can check it out. I actually hadn't read Anne of Green Gables until the last, 8 to 10 years, and I have since read it a few times now, the first book. But I grew up knowing the story and seeing the movie with Megan Follows, and I absolutely loved it. And this is just, it's a Canadian classic, and I adore Anne and all of the characters, really. It's a delightful story with a magical setting, and I do still need to finish reading the series all the way through. The next book was published in 1976, and I read this when I was 14. It's Roots by Alex Haley, and this is another classic. I can't remember how I got this book, but I remember, laying on my bed being enveloped in the story of Kunta Kinte until it got dark and I couldn't see the writing on the page anymore. This is historical fiction, but the story came about by Alex Haley researching his family history to find documentation and to find more to back up the family stories that his grandmother used to tell him. So the story of Kunta Kinte has never left me, and it is what sparked my interest in learning more about the history of Black people before slavery. The next book was published in 1977, and it's The Thorn by Colleen McCullough. So this is a massively huge book and an epic family saga. It takes place in Australia, and it follows a few generations of the Clearys. One of the main storylines is of Maggie, who is the only daughter, and it is her coming of age story and her love affair with a priest, Father Ralph de Bricassar. And when I read this book, I read it with my best friend. This was long before I knew there was such a thing called buddy reads, but that's basically what we did. And the plan was that we would read the book and then spend a day watching the miniseries that had been made early in the 80s. So after we read the book, I spent the night at her place and we watched the, 6 or 8 hour miniseries. And at the end, she was sobbing and I laughed at her. And then I vowed to never laugh at her when she was crying in a movie again. The next book is the first of a series, Clan of the Cave Bear by Jean Auel or Auel. I'm not sure how she pronounced her name. This was published in 1980, and probably when I was about 8 or 9, I watched the movie with Daryl Hannah with my mom. And my mom had a copy of this book on a bookshelf in her home, so I wanted to read it, but she wouldn't let me because there are a couple of sex scenes in it, and I don't ever remember another time that I was told that I couldn't read a book. So this book felt very forbidden to me, so much so that even once I got older and had read, books with more descriptive scenes than what is in The Clan of the Cave Bear, it took me a long time to pick up the book and actually read it. I have since read the entire Earth's Children series. This one is my favorite though. And it is the story of Ayla, a young girl who survives a natural disaster during the Ice Age. And she is raised by people of the clan. And she is one of my favorite female characters. And I loved how this story was told. It's very well researched. And it's worth checking out if you haven't read it. After that, we skip almost all of the 80s until 1989. One of my favorite books of all time, A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. This story has so many things I love. A young, smart protagonist, Owen. It's a coming-of-age story. It's about friendship and loss and love. And it makes you laugh and it makes you cry. And Owen Meany will just always have a very special place in my heart. Another book from 1989 that makes the list is The Power of One. This is by Bryce Courtenay. And this is my best friend's favorite book of all time. Yes, the same friend that I laughed at when she cried. This book is up there for me too. This is the story of PK, and it takes place in South Africa. And it's another coming of age story. In many ways, it's a story ahead of its time. It deals with race, prejudice, apartheid, and how one person can make a difference. It does have a very hopeful message. Next is She's Come Undone by Wally Lamb. This was published in 1992. And I talked about this recently when I highlighted all of Wally Lamb's books. And this is his debut novel. It's another coming-of-age story. This is one about Dolores Price, who ends up in a mental institution, and it is about how she comes to terms with her life and things that have happened. And this is one of the few books that have made me cry, like honest to goodness cry. And unfortunately for me, it was on a public bus. But Wally Lamb writes his female characters really, really, really well. Moving on to 1995, I picked up Where the Heart Is by Billie after browsing my university bookstore. I remember being so excited that there was a bookstore on campus. And this was a spontaneous buy. I had never heard of Billie before that, and I thought the cover looked cool and the blurb sounded interesting. So I was living on my own in my own apartment by this time. And I remember going home and laying on my couch, and I read this book in one sitting, and I loved it. So Novalee is the main character. She's 17 at the beginning of the story. She's pregnant, and she finds herself stranded at a Walmart in a tiny town in Oklahoma. And the story is about how she survives. It's about a found or chosen family, and it's such a heartwarming read. Also in 1995 is The Horse Whisperer by Nicholas Evans. This is a story about resilience and healing. And if you've seen the movie, the book is a little bit different. Grace is a teenager who gets into an accident while she's out riding her horse, Pilgrim. And both Pilgrim and the girl have changed since the accident. They are angry and bitter, and Pilgrim is quite dangerous. Grace's mother, Annie, finds out about a man named Tom Booker, who is considered a horse whisperer. And she takes Grace and Pilgrim to him to see if he can help them. Next up is Fall on Your Knees by Anne-Marie MacDonald. And this was published in 1996, and it blew me away. This story takes place in Cape Breton, Canada's east coast. And it is about 4 sisters, and if you like a story about family dynamics, family secrets, and redemption, then this might be a book for you to check out. Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden is next on my list. This was published in 1997, And this book is another instance in which a male author was able to, not only write female characters so well, but in this case also transport me to a world and culture that I knew nothing about. Also, Arthur Golden, why have you not written anything else? I've been waiting a very, very, very long time. Please write something. Okay, up next is a book that I've talked about before, The Red Tent by Anita Diamant. This was also published in 1997, and this is the story of Dinah and her mothers, which were the 4 wives of Jacob. And Diamant takes the women of the book of Genesis and just brings them to life in the most compelling way. This is one of my favorite books of all time, and I can still remember reading it along with some other really great books while I was on a road trip to the East Coast with my dad. Okay, finishing off the 1990s is Girl with a Pearl Earring. This is by Tracy Chevalier, and it was published in 1999, and I loved this book. It's historical fiction about the Dutch painter Vermeer, but the story is really focused around Griet, I think is how you say it, and she's the anonymous girl in the famous painting. And I love how Chevalier imagined this story and created these characters. It's such beautiful writing. So next up is another historical fiction, The Stone Carvers by Jane Urquhart, which was published in 2001. First, I love Jane Urquhart, and I could have had a few of her books on this list, and I chose this one because I read this book while I was on a trip to Europe with my dad, and we actually visited Vimy Ridge, and this book tells the story about a grandfather and granddaughter, and it tells about the statue that's at Vimy. So this story made me see it in a whole new light on our visit. So next is another story of building and creating, and that is Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, which was published in 2002. And I'm also noticing that many books on this list are chunkies. They're pretty big. This one included, it's like over 900 pages. But I devoured this while visiting my family in BC. I sat on the couch and read while my uncle sat in his chair reading his, as he would say, a whodunit book. This is the first book in the Kingsbridge series, and it's an epic tale of building a cathedral in medieval England. But it's so much more than that, and this is about the people and their lives, their struggles and their successes. There are love stories, and there's violence and politics and the church, and this is just such a good book. If you haven't read it yet, please do. So next we skip ahead a bit to 2005 with The Book Thief by Markus Zusak, and a book narrated by death. I thought it was genius, and I was all in. I thought this was such an interesting and unique way to tell a story during World War II. And of course I love a good female protagonist, which young Liesl definitely fits that description. So another favorite author of mine is Lisa Genova, and her novel Still Alice is next. This was published in 2007. And after I read this book, in which Alice is diagnosed with early onset dementia, Lisa Genova quickly became an auto-buy author for me. So this book really rips your heart out. I can still recall like the vivid scenes of when she gets lost and goes into her neighbor's home, or when she thinks the carpet is a hole in the floor and she doesn't want anyone to fall in, and it's just heartbreaking, and it's so well written. Okay, we have a few more to go here. I think this is number 18. The Art of Racing in the Rain by Garth Stein, which was published in 2008. And just like I enjoyed a book narrated by death, it turns out I also enjoy a book narrated by a dog. I mean, Enzo captured my heart and has never let go. If you are a dog lover, and you know what, even if you aren't, I think that you will still fall in love with Enzo. Up next is Richard Wagamese. A favorites list of mine would not be complete without a Richard Wagamese book on it. And I chose Indian Horse, which was published in 2012. And this is a story about a young man who has become an alcoholic. And in order to heal and survive, he must tell his story. How he was taken from his family and put in residential school. He finds out that he has a talent for hockey. But even hockey, doesn't mean escape from racism and abuse and violence. So it's an incredible story. Next up is The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert, which was published in 2013. This book, in my opinion, has been so underrated. The strong female character in this story is Alma, and she was born in 1800, and after her father dies, she inherits his money, and she becomes a botanist and wants to learn how the world works. And there's also a love story as Alma falls in love with an artist. This story is just so beautifully written, and I absolutely loved it, and I haven't heard, very many people talk about it. I think in this case, Eat, Pray, Love tends to get more attention, which is unfortunate, but this one is worth checking out if you haven't already. Okay, so number 21 is a book I've already been gushing about for a while now, and that is Ordinary Grace by William Kent Kruger, which was published in 2013. And I just read this book last year, and it gives me all the feels. It's another coming-of-age story about brothers Frank and Jake. Jake is my favorite. There has been a murder in their small town, and well, actually there are a few. And as the reader, you are taken along on their journey, on Frank and Jake's journeys and adventures. And I absolutely loved the writing of this story and the relationship between the boys. And it's still the book that I think about often. The final book at number 22 is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, which was published in 2018. And I know this book had a lot of hype, and for me that totally made sense. I loved the story of the marsh girl. Her name is Kaya, and she makes a way for herself in a world that has shunned her. And she's another character who loves nature, and I just really enjoyed how this book was written. I've heard it's going to be made into a film, so that will be interesting. I would definitely go see that. And I am hoping that Delia Owens will write another novel as well. So those are 22 fiction books that I gave 5 stars to over the years. Tomorrow I will share 22 non-fiction books that I gave 5 stars to. So stay tuned for that, and I will link that in this video when that comes out. So please let me know if you have read any of these books, or if there are any that you would add to the list. I'd love to hear what you have to say about any of them, and I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.